And before we begin, I would like to give some tips on how we can make this webinar a success. Because after all the presentations have finished, there will be time for discussion. And we do this using the Q&A button, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. And you can type your questions that you have to the presenters in there already during the presentations, so we can start collecting the questions. And if you see questions that you find particularly interesting, you can give them a thumbs up, and they will rank higher, and you will have a bigger chance that they will get answered. And please, if you address your question to a certain speaker, also add the name of the presenter so we know whom the question is for. And there is not a lot of time for discussion after the presentations, but we will share the questions with the presenters so you can continue the discussion afterwards as well. So now this is all very new to all of us, and we will try our best to make it a success. And please let us know afterwards if there are things that we could improve. And then I would now like to give the floor to our chair, Virginia.
So thank you, Husta. Thank you, everybody. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining this presentation. Thank you to the presenters for preparing presentations for this opportunity. I'm very happy that we can organize our mortality and longevity sessions. So, as it has already been specified on the website, this webinar contains some selected papers from the original big pool of papers that had been selected for the EPC conferences that unfortunately, yeah, we all know that was cancelled. So I am Virginia Zarulli, Associate Professor at the University of Southern Denmark at the Interdisciplinary Center on Population Dynamics, and I welcome all our 4 speakers. So the speakers have about 10 minutes to present. During the presentation, you will be able to ask a question in the Q&A box, and at the end of the 4 presentations, I will read the questions for you, and we'll get the chance to have these questions answered. So we start with our first speaker, John Anson, that he's going to present the triple helix of social hierarchy, Bourdieu's 3 forms of capital. So, John, the floor is yours.
You should unmute yourself, John.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, you can see my screen?
No, yeah. We can't hear you.
Okay. I'm going to very briefly present a lot of ideas, something that Bourdieu would have said you should never do because I have only ideas and no data, and presenting ideas without data, Bourdieu said, is like crossing the border without a suitcase. You have nothing to declare. But I will do it anyway. And the point is, I'm going to look at the ideas behind mortality and social hierarchy, how we conceptualize social class, and why I think Bourdieu's 3 types of capital provide us with a good way of working. If we look at the history of mortality analysis, everybody talks about inequality, social class. Basically, everybody's agreed that there is something important about hierarchy, but there's no agreement of what the ranking should be or what brings together different types of ranking. Income, education, occupation, ethnicity, religious affiliation, physical location. What I'm looking for is some kind of conceptual framework that will enable us to organize hierarchy, some underlying logic, which gets expressed in different ways. So we want groups or ideas that are in some way mutually exclusive, exhaustive, but they can always be expanded as ideas move forward. And the idea is that we will get a series of different rankings, which are what I will call partially ordered. In other words, basically they are correlated, they run together, but at the same time there are important differences. We start social class, it always starts with Marx, the idea of exploitation. I work for Jack, I get $100, Jack adds $200 to the value of what he is producing. He's given me $100, he's got $100 left in his hand. I've only received $100, but my work is worth $200. This Marx first calls exploitation, and the question is how much of those $200 goes to me and how much stays with Jack is a question of the power relations between us. This is the basic idea, but when Marx starts discussing classes, categories, he talks of owners of land, capital, labor power, physicians, government officials, vintners, farmers, different groups with different, or each one with the same revenue and source of revenue, infinite fragmentation, and here the manuscript breaks off. Marx did not have a solution. Basically, the question is how do we transform a dynamic relation, which is Marx's view of class, into synchronic categories, which is what we count in various surveys or in our analyses of mortality. And I'm going to present various suggestions. Weber talks about 3 different rankings: class, status, and party. It's a 3-dimensional space, close correlation between the 3 dimensions, with a long-term economic logic which takes on many forms. Again, Weber's been at the basis of all sorts of other things, but there's a sense that we're not quite sure how to deal with Weber either. The English Registrar General in 1911 suggested classifications, various classifications. Gerard Lenski in the 1950s suggested status crystallization. There are many different forms, but they are related, and how they are related is an empirical question. White suggested 3 pure types: bourgeoisie, proletariat, petty bourgeoisie, contradictory locations. But then he said, well, we have to get Weber back in here somehow. John Goldthorpe goes back to the Registrar General, a general scheme of 7 or 11. He jumps from one to the other. And Mike Savage did a whole group of people did a big survey with a 7-point scheme, differentiated by income, assets, education, social contacts. Okay, sorry, that was a bit too fast. So basically what I'm saying is we have various ways of looking at social hierarchy. Some of the schemes are unidimensional, some are multidimensional. There's very little overlying logic. We're looking at occupation, we're looking at income, we're looking at education, we're looking at also ethnicity, looking at all sorts of things. And the question is, how do we bring it all together to create one logical scheme that will put everybody on the same, shall we say, on the same drawing board in a comparison, and we will know when people are or are not comparable. So go to Bourdieu, starting in the 1970s. Bourdieu, the book Distinction was published in 1979, I think. Suggested we need to go back to the idea of capital. Capital is whatever I have, which I have accumulated, and which enables me to benefit from other people's work. In other words, everybody's working or not working, certain amount of things are being produced. The distribution, who gets what, is an empirical question. It's a power relationship. The capital I have enables me to put my hands on what is being produced. And he suggests 3 different types of capital: economic capital, which is wealth and income; cultural capital, educational credentials, but also socially valued knowledge. Socially valued means people in power like it, they will value it. And social capital, which are resources which can be accessed through network relations. So we have three semi-independent dimensions, different modes of transmission and maintenance. They cannot be conflated or collapsed onto one dimension. How do we measure it? No accepted standards. We have no accepted way of measuring these things, and it's a problem. And it's a problem because not only we don't have, but anything we suggest will work differently in different places. Different researchers will do different things. Makes comparison very, very difficult. We're not even sure what level we should be measuring. The individual, the household, geographical area. Are women to be evaluated in themselves as part of a household? Are men themselves a part of their household, and so on? Economic capital is the easiest. We can measure by income, home ownership, and so on. Cultural capital is a bit more difficult because we can talk about the highest certificate, but not all certificates are equivalent. If you go to Harvard or you go to a state university, these are completely different things, and the same is true in every country. The work content, the certification content, what did you study? Cultural consumption, do you go to the theater, do you go to films, do you go to concerts, what concerts, do you go to a sports game, to a football match? These are all cultural consumption, but they will be evaluated differently. And of course, these are nominal categories, which we're going to have to rank on the basis of some external criterion. I should point out, social capital is not what Coleman and Putnam mean by social capital. This is not a social situation. This is my access to cultural and economic capital through knowing people in my network my network of people I'm in contact with. So there's very little direct data. We don't know who's likely to have social capital. We can talk about ethnicities relationship, that those who are in, should we say, high status ethnicities have more contact with people with power and with access to capital, or maybe it's religious organization, the school you went to, the university you went to, elite club membership, where you were in the army. These are all sorts of things which will give you social capital, access to people who have access to capital. So to summarize, social hierarchy is ever present. It's poorly conceptualized. We just take ideas off the shelf, but we don't think them through. It's probably not unidimensional. We need an overarching concept to organize the dimensions. Bourdieu, three forms of capital, material, cultural, social, provides such a scheme, and it's grounded in the sociological and Marxian concept of class. We need to solve the issues of operationalization, and we need to see how the three forms of capital relate to mortality, fertility, and so on, which I started doing, but that's a different paper. So, thank you very much. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, John. Very, a lot of food for thought. We often refer to this categorization. We always analyze whatever demographic phenomenon by education, economic capital, and so on and so on. So forth. We have to, of course, think about these categorizations, these categories, and this variable very, very deeply. So now we go on to the next presentation. Beyond differences in means, rising mortality stratification among income groups in Finland, 1996-2014. We have the floor is yours. Yasin. You're muted.
Can you hear?
Yeah. Yes.
Froze
Now
a
we can.
little bit just now. Sorry. Hi. I think what I'm going to present is kind of related to what John just presented. So we're looking at the economic capital, the income, and its effect on mortality in Finland. And as you can see from the screen, this is work with several other colleagues. And first, a few words on the background. So we all know there is socioeconomic gradient in mortality, which might reveal the unequal distribution of healthcare resources, or of course, behavioral differences such as smoking and alcohol consumption. And in the literature, a common way to assess socioeconomic differences is to look at their mean differences, like age-standardized mortality rates or life expectancy. And in a recent strand of research, there is another approach to look at the variation, the within-group variation of lifespan distribution. So smaller variation is usually a desirable goal. For individuals, it means less uncertainty about when you are going to die. And in this study, we are taking a third approach. That's the level of discrepancy of two age-death distributions, or sometimes it's called statistical distance, or level of similarity between two distributions. So there's a bunch of indexes, and we chose the Web's-Hages index, and its computation is simple, and it has nice graphic and sociological interpretation. So it's computed as the degree of non-overlap in the area of two probability distributions. So if two distributions, they overlap perfectly, then the value of this index is 0. And if there is no overlap, it's 1. So it's the proportion of non-overlap. And there in sociology, there is a concept of stratification, which is kind of different from what we always say about inequality. Stratification is the phenomenon of society being divided into hierarchically laid out strata, and focuses on the formation of observable layers of strata in accordance with group characteristics, such as income, class. And basically, it focuses on the extent to which two groups have unique social strata in our society. And here we offer 4 hypothetical scenarios, as you can see, A, B, C, and D. So in A and B, we have the difference in life expectancy of two groups. They're at the same level, but we can have completely different results of stratification. So there is more overlap in the case of B. So we say A have more stratification. And this is the same for C and D. And if we compare A with C or B with D, we have larger difference in life expectancy and also more stratification, higher stratification level. So of course, in real life, things are more complicated. They are not exactly the same. They tend not to be exactly the same in within group variation. So in this study, we look at Finland. We use Finnish registry data, and we use household disposable income, and death counts and exposures classified into 5 income quintiles. And then we smooth the data at older age within each year. We constructed period life tables from 1996 to 2017. We have single year age group from age 25 and to the last age group of age 110 plus. We measure within group lifespan variation by standard deviation. And these are the results. This graph shows the distributions of the lowest and the highest income groups by sex in the first 5 periods of our study and in the most recent 5 periods. So over time, we see both low and high income groups, they are shifting towards the right. So they have higher life expectancy in the most recent periods. For males, the difference in life expectancy became larger in the more recent periods. And also we have higher stratification, and also difference in within group variation became larger. But for females, we see the difference in life expectancy decrease, but stratification increase, and difference in within group variation also increase. We can see clearly from the distributions, that is mainly because of this mortality hump in pre-retirement age, at pre-retirement ages. Even though a large proportion of low-income females, they can reach high ages, just as the high-income females, but there is a little hump, and this is the same case for males, but not so many males can reach the same level at very high ages. And now this figure is about life expectancy and lifespan inequality by income groups in Finland. So life expectancy for all the 5 income groups, they increased over the time, while standard deviation at age 25, they decreased for the highest 4 income groups, but increased for the lowest income group. What about their difference? So this is our main results. The trends of mortality stratification, trends of difference in E25 and SD25 between the lowest and the highest 20% income groups. For stratification, for both males and females, we see steady increase over the time. And there's little bits of stagnation or slight decrease for males. But if we look at difference in life expectancy, we see both males and females, they have the same trends, increase first and decrease in the most recent 10 years also. And for females, the level of difference in life expectancy is lower than the beginning of our study. And if we look at difference in within group variation, they increase continuously over the period. And males and females at the end, they're at the same level, more or less the same level. So the short conclusion is that we have 3 dimensions of differences between income groups, and they have different trends and results, can provide different insights. And this graph is the association between stratification on the y-axis and the other 2 measures. For males, they're closely related, but for females, it's less so. So for males with the knowledge of difference in life expectancy or difference in standard deviation, we can predict better the level of stratification. But what about the dynamics of changes? So here we show the yearly association of yearly changes for every 2 consecutive years. If we have the increase of the difference in life expectancy, will we see an increase in stratification? If so, it should fall in this area. If they both increase or both decrease, for male, it's more or less the case. But for females, we can see it's a little bit more random. So we have decrease in the mean values, but increase 20% of the cases increase in stratification. And if we look at the dynamics between stratification and SD differences, it's even more random. So in summary, we provide new evidence of how income is determining lifetimes in Finland. And we offer several explanations. Remember in the first graph, I showed that there is a little mortality hump for the low income group. So excess mortality of ages between 50 and 74 might be the reason. It's relevant to the theory of replace of intervening mechanisms, that causes that kill the people in the past are different now. So low income people, they are more affected. They're more affected by these causes. And also might be because of the technological changes over the time. So even though we have improvements in medical resources, they might not be equally available for different income groups, but it can be other technological changes such as information, the ability or the sensitivity to health knowledge, etc. So they might exacerbate the mortality stratification by income in Finland. And we also admit there might be reverse causality and some implications for individuals. So for lower SES individuals, if they can reach high older ages, so they tend to have fewer family members, and also less social ties, which might lead to further physical and mental health problems. And as many other social stratification, mortality stratification can also cause the negative social consequences, such as social unrest. And yeah, I think time is up. That's all of my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Perfectly on time. 10 minutes and 3 seconds. Super sharp. Very well. Thank you. Okay, now we move on to the next presentation. Another form of capital, economic capital, I assume, housing conditions and mortality in Belgium between 1991 and 2016. So we leave the floor to Jean Damien.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Virginia. Thank you. So, is it okay for you? Is it okay?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, it's perfect.
So I will present today some results for a study about housing conditions and mortality in Belgium for the period 1991 and 2016. Okay, so during this period, 1991-2016, there was a rise in life expectancy in Belgium, just like in many other countries, as it was mentioned. But this did not go at the same pace, at the same speed for everyone, and it followed a social gradient in health. The higher on the social scale, the better your health status, and the faster your rise in life expectancy across time. This led to a rise in social inequalities in health and mortality. And at the crossroads between individual, political, and environmental levels, we can focus today on housing conditions. So your housing conditions is both a reflection of your economic possibilities, of what you can afford, and it is also an important factor in your health status. It can feed or generate some infections, some chronic illnesses, some accidents, some psychological troubles or issues. Housing tenure, so the fact that you own or that you rent your accommodation is also important. For example, in Belgium, tenants are more at risk of being poor than owners, and they're also more at risk of being in a bad health situation compared to owners. In scientific literature, housing is mainly considered as a proxy for socioeconomic background and situation, and there are not so much empirical studies considering housing as a very specific determinant in health, and it was never done in Belgium before. That's why we can present those research hypotheses. So first, in Belgium, poor housing quality, we assume that poor housing quality is associated with a shorter life expectancy, that tenants have shorter life expectancy than owners. Then we believe that housing-driven inequalities in mortality follow the trend, the same trend as other socioeconomic variables, which means that they increased over time. And finally, housing conditions have their own impact on mortality, even after controlling for socioeconomic characteristics. To do so, we used some interesting data, the national data sources. So we used the 91, 2001, and 2011 Belgian censuses for socioeconomic information, and we coupled this with the National Register from 1991 to 2016 for more demographic information. What we tried to measure was death, of course, during the 5 years periods following each census. We measured housing conditions through two tools. The first one is an index. It will be called the Housing Quality Score in the next slides. So it gathers some information about your housing, such as the presence of a bathroom, of central heating, of a garage, of a separate kitchen, of double glazing. It also takes into account the density of occupation, so the number of persons per rooms inside the household, and housing tenure. And then housing tenure will be treated separately. We carried out two methodological approaches. The first one is the calculation of life expectancies, and the second one is some logistic regression models. So to test the first hypothesis, we calculated some life expectancies according to quartiles of housing quality score, the index. So for your information, the first quartile represents 25% of the population whose housing quality score is the lowest. So what we can see at first sight is that there is a gradient. The higher your housing quality quartile, the longer your life expectancy. And this is true for both males and females and for both considered periods. There are also some gender differences. The gaps between quartiles are higher for males than for females. To test the second hypothesis, we did the same. We calculated some life expectancies according to housing tenure, and we can see that in average owners have a longer life expectancy than tenants, and this is true for both males and females and for the two periods. Again, there are some gender differences. The gaps are higher for males again. To test the third hypothesis, we compare life expectancy evolutions across time. The first thing that we can see is that the rise in life expectancy is a global phenomenon for the whole population, no matter the housing score quartile or the tenure status. But the gain in life expectancy did not go at the same pace, at the same speed for everyone. The gain in life expectancy went faster for people living in lower housing conditions, the Q1, than for people living in better housing conditions, the Q4, which led to a restriction of the gap in life expectancy between the first and the fourth housing score quartiles, which is quite unexpected in a context of rising social inequalities in health. On the other hand, the rise in life expectancy went faster for owners than for tenants, which led to a rise in the gap of life expectancy between owners and tenants throughout time. So how can we explain the first unexpected result? How can we explain that inequalities in life expectancy according to housing score quartiles have decreased over the decades? So we can observe the repartition of the Q1 population by educational attainment. So here I chose education as a proxy for overall socioeconomic context. In 1991, the Q1 population is mainly made of lower educated population, which probably means that this population may accumulate disadvantages in terms of economic resources, working conditions, access to information, but also in terms of access to healthcare and to prevention. In 2011, the Q1 population has changed. This can be explained by a more disrupted life with more union dissolutions, moments of unemployment, and difficulty to enter a long-term career, even for the more privileged educational and social categories. This loss of stability for all social categories in the overall life have impacts on the housing trajectory too. And in 2011, the Q1 population is more socially diverse. This is a population that, in spite of moments of low quality housing, still has some resources and does not accumulate the disadvantages as it used to be in 1991. To test the fourth hypothesis, we ran some logistic regression models trying to measure the risk of death on the 5 years periods. Please note that here the housing score was not recorded into quartiles but into 3 categories because I wanted to focus on the low category, a 10% first decile category, and even after controlling for demographic and socioeconomic individual characteristics, there is still a gradient according to which a better housing quality is associated with a lower risk of mortality. For housing tenure, again, even after controlling for social, economic, demographic, and housing quality, we still have tenants who have a higher risk of mortality than owners. So to sum up this presentation, we can say that yes, in Belgium, through national data, living in better housing quality is associated with a longer life expectancy, and tenants are associated with shorter life expectancy. over time, the inequalities in life expectancy between owners and tenants increased, and there was a decrease in these inequalities between the Q1 and the Q4, which can be explained by more social diversity in a poorly housed population. And even after controlling for individual characteristics, we can still have these conclusions. So housing is not only a vector in the relation between social inequalities and health mortality, but it has its own specific relation and impact on mortality inequalities, even if you cannot be sure of the causality effect because we work with some cross-sectional data. So there is a need for future research and for public action to investigate the underlying mechanisms of this relation between, on the one hand, housing conditions and transition and changes, and on the other hand, inequalities in physical and mental health. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Now we move on to our last speaker for today, Aline de Sequel, who is presenting prevalence of multimorbidity and frailty at death over the age of 50 in Italy.
You have to unmute yourself, Aline.
Okay, so good evening, everybody, and good evening to my co-authors who may be listening to me. And thank you to the EPC conveners for offering us the possibility to present our research today. This research is part of a not new, but a developing strand of research that takes into account all entries on the death certificates called multiple causes of death in order to describe more accurately the processes leading to death. The rationale behind this approach is that with increased life expectancy, the prevalence of multimorbidity at death might increase, which is a major challenge for health systems and caregivers. So in this particular project, our aim is to implement a new classification of death records, accounting not only for multimorbidity, but also for frailty. So we want to answer these specific questions. What is the prevalence of multimorbidity and frailty at death? And what about corresponding mortality rates? How do they change with age? And are there differences between genders? The data we use are cause of death data processed by the Italian National Institute of Statistics for year 2014 and for ages over 50. Causes are coded according to the ICD-10. And following the WHO rules, the Italian death certificate comprises two parts. Part one is for the main causal process leading to death. Part two is for any other condition not mentioned on part one, but that have contributed to the death. The classification process relies on the response given to three questions. First, which type of process is reported on part one? It might be one single process, there might be several processes, or there might be an ill-defined process. Second, are there contributing causes on part two, and we will only account for well-defined causes or causes that are different from frailty symptoms. And lastly, are there mentions of frailty anywhere on the death certificate? So in fact, the most difficult task in the distinction is the distinction between records where there is only one single process on part one, which should always be the case, and record where there are several processes, which corresponds in fact to inappropriate certification. To do that, we use the decision tables that are embedded in the IRIS system, which is used internationally and at least in many European countries to select the underlying cause of death. So the system includes a list of relations between codes, and more especially it includes a list of obvious consequences that indicates that one cause is causally related with another one. So with this tool, we are able to determine whether or not there is only one causal process on the first part of the death certificate or not. As far as frailty is concerned, we use the following list of codes. It includes physical symptoms like cachexia, incontinence, or mobility, as well as mental problems like dementia and more especially Alzheimer's disease, which is the code G30. So the output of our classification is the type of process combined with frailty. Multimorbid processes correspond, in fact, to 3 different situations. There might be cases where there is one single causal process in part 1 with contributing causes in part 2, or several processes in part 1 with or without contributing causes in part 2, or an ill-defined process in part 1 with contributing causes in part 2. Just a few examples to make it more concrete. So these are examples taken from our database. So the red color is for the cause that have been selected as the underlying cause of death. The blue zone corresponds to part 2 of the death certificate, and you have here 4 examples of death certificates. So in the first case, on part 1, we have one single process, so it's a malignant neoplasm with secondary malignant neoplasms and not well-defined other causes. And on part 2, you have well-defined conditions, diabetes and hypertension. So it's a case of multimorbidity. The second case is a case where you have an ill-defined cause on part 1, respiratory failure, but a well-defined contributing cause on part 2, alcoholism, cirrhosis of liver, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. The 2 last cases correspond to cases where you have several processes on part 1. So on the first one, you have a malignant neoplasm and at the same time Alzheimer's disease that are not causally related. And the last one, you have heart disease that has been selected at the underlying cause, but you also have a thyroiditis and disease of bronchus that are independent. You also, in that case, you have symptoms that correspond to frailty symptoms. You have senility and malaise and fatigue. So this will be a case of multimorbidity with frailty. So these are our results. So here you have for males and females the results. So left graph displays the proportion of the 3 processes among all deaths, and the right graph displays corresponding mortality rates by age groups and gender. So blue is for males and red for females. The solid line is for multimorbid processes and the dotted lines for simple and ill-defined processes. So multimorbid processes represent 59% of deaths at the age of 50 and over, with higher proportions at old ages among men. Age patterns are very similar for males and females, with an increase until the age of 90, followed by the decline at older ages. The prevalence of multimorbid processes exceeds that of simple processes over the age of 60 for males and over the age of 65 for females. Regarding rates are higher for men than for women at all ages for both simple and multimorbid processes. As far as frailty is concerned, the share of deaths mentioning frailty at age 50 and over is 25%, so it's 21% for male and 28% for females. So in these graphs, the 2 dimensions of the classification are combined. As an example, 24% of the female deaths have both frailty and multimorbidity. So you see that the share of deaths mentioning frailty increases strongly with age, and it is higher for females than for males, whatever the morbid process. Regarding rates, differences between genders are reduced, especially at the oldest ages, where levels of mortality with frailty are the same for men and women. To conclude, this research opens the door for a number of other studies. So we would like to know more about the causes reported on death records involving multimorbidity. We can cross-tabulate the usual classification based on the underlying cause of death with this new classification in order to check whether the age and sex patterns are underlying cause of death specific or not. We want to check whether these patterns are country-specific or not. We want to examine trends. Is multimorbidity at death becoming more frequent? And lastly, we are interested in examining the fluctuation of the structure of the deaths according to multimorbidity and frailty during sanitary crises due to heat waves, cold winters, and to epidemics. And of course, we want to apply this approach to the cause of death data of the COVID pandemics. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Aline. Perfect time. So, well, thank you very much, really. Thank you to all the speakers for very interesting presentations, very related but different aspects of mortality and longevity research, which is very nice because this was So to be a sort of a summary of the overall mortality and longevity theme. So I see that there are questions, so we have time to go on and ask these questions. So I start with a question for John. So they ask, we should also take into account in the discussion the life course perspective. Educational inequalities might be more relevant at younger ages compared to long-term wealth indicators, which might be more important at older ages. So talking about stratification, we might distinguish several strata: socioeconomic status, so economic class, gender, and migrant background. Within each of these strata, we can consider each form of capital suggested by Bourdieu at different levels. So the question is, would that be a good strategy?
When you start making things complicated, they get more complicated.
Yeah.
So take it in two parts. First of all, we can expect if we have three different strands, we can expect them possibly to be, each one to be more important at different ages. And some work that I've started does suggest, can you turn your mic off? Someone's mic is making a lot of noise. I've been working with looking across the lifespan. Different forms of capital seem to be important at different stages of the lifespan. So yes, there is a time, a life course issue here. The second issue is, what do we do about gender? The question is, can we talk about gender beyond issues of capital? In other words, if women are disadvantaged, are they disadvantaged because they have less capital, or because there is a separate issue of the way women can access social power and the effect on mortality? By looking at capital along three dimensions, the same is true for migrants. We can see whether, is it important that you are a migrant, or is it important that you have a lack of capital? What does it mean to be a Moroccan migrant in Belgium, and what does it mean to be an American migrant in Israel, or a British migrant in the United States? So in other words, migrant can mean lots of different things. You have to decide. You can't just say migrant status is a problem, though a migrant may have less social capital. You may have less access to people with cultural and economic capital. So in that sense, migrant can be important, but you can translate it into capital terms. As I said, for gender, whether women have less capital in terms of economic, cultural, or social capital, again, it's an empirical question. Is the gender effect beyond the capital effect? I think these are empirical questions which I can't say offhand which one is the answer, but by setting out, conceptualizing social hierarchy in terms of capital, I can at least say what I'm talking about, and not just say, well, there is some kind of social hierarchy, but I'm not quite sure why we're using this. And my point is, we have a tendency in demography to use concepts of social hierarchy without thinking about why we're using this particular concept or a different one.
Okay, thank you very much. There is another question for you. So they ask, would you measure social capital by professional social network? For example, a famous is LinkedIn, a social media. So would you measure social capital by professional social network? Some sociologists, such as Granovetter, hypothesizes that it is strength of weak ties that matter.
Yes, definitely measure. The idea of social capital leads us into social networks very definitely. And we need to think about how we get the data, because what I suggested was we can guess who has access. Someone born in the country, someone born in the right place in the country has more access than a new immigrant or somebody who lives in the wrong part of the country, or someone in the right ethnic group as opposed to the wrong ethnic group. Obviously, if we can measure it through network theory, we are in a much better position to translate the network relationships. But again, it's not just a question of how you are networked, but who you are networking with. In other words, different people in the network have a different value. Granovetter is important, but we have to remember what he is really saying. Granovetter did not say weak ties are important because they are weak ties. Granovetter said weak ties are important because they give you access to various parts of the network that you're not really part of. We can't be deeply embedded in all parts of the network. If we have weak ties, we can have access to parts of the network we are not really members of. And this is the importance of weak ties. And again, it's a question of how do we develop the measurement. I think one of the problems, I mean, we're talking 30 or more years since Bourdieu suggested social capital, and we are still very, very short of good measures of what we mean by social capital, which is a problem for sociologists, but it's also a problem for demographers.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Now we move on. We have other interesting questions. So for Jakshin, could you give some clue about the relation between Weyl-Hedges index and the Kullback-Leibler distance? Since you talk about densities, then it would be natural to see difference by looking at the Kullback-Leibler divergence, but I may have missed something. Thanks.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Virginia, and thank you very much, Giancarlo. I think it's a great question. So we are aware that there are many different other measures, such as the KLD, and a couple of studies, they already use this measure to look at whether mortality schedule between two groups are converging. And I think one of the reasons we didn't use KLD is because it's asymmetric, meaning if you calculate KLD from group A to group B, the value is different from B to A. So I think this is one disadvantage. And the other one is because we have a very simple and I think nice interpretation of this Weyl-Hedges index. But I think what we can do is to calculate other distance measures and to see if the trends are similar to what we find here. Yeah, that's my short answer.
You're muted, Virginia.
Mute myself. Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah. Another question for you, Jakshin. So the stratification measures shown in the presentation compare the lowest and the highest quintiles. So there are 10 pairwise stratification measures, so to say. Are the remaining 9 comparisons irrelevant? How to incorporate them into the analysis?
Thank you, Inaki. And yeah, it's a really interesting question. So yes, we of course we did analysis for all the comparisons, and for most of them, if we look at the overall trends, they're more unstable. But what we can do is to calculate the overall stratification level of the 5 groups to calculate the average level of all the comparisons, because their group sizes in our case are the same. If they have different group sizes, say if we have educational groups, then we can weight them by their group size and then calculate a weighted stratification level of the whole society. And I actually did calculate the average of all the comparison, and the trends, they're very similar to what we find if we only look at the lowest and highest income quintiles. And also because we show the distributions of these two groups at the beginning. So I think it's nice to show the consistent results instead of switching between the analysis.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one last question, if the host agrees.
Yeah, one short question and short answer, and then we'll wrap up.
Short and short. So for Joan, why did you use logistic regression and not survival analysis? I guess you have exposure time for each individual in your follow-up.
So the answer is pretty simple, is that at the time I did this research, I didn't have the data. I only had the death per year, the number of the year of the death actually. So I could not really make a survival analysis, but it's definitely something I want to do further in my thesis because I'm at the beginning. So it's definitely something I want to do once I have access to the data, because it's not easy to have access to this kind of data.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you everybody for the interesting discussions and questions and presentations. So, well, for me, it's all.
Well, thank you, Virginia, and thank you to all the presenters for very interesting presentations and for joining us in such short notice. And I think Nico wants to say something.
Yes, I would like to thank everybody, of course, too. And at the height, we had about 77 people watching, so we had a very good good attendance. So I would like to thank all people that joined us as attendants and for posing their questions as well. And just to say that in the European Association in NEEPS, we have now this webinar service that will be available for our working group. So we will have many more webinars, not only linked to the European Population Conference, but also on other topics. So please do not forget to join all the other webinars tomorrow. Tomorrow we will have 3, and we start at 10 o'clock by a webinar on the life course. So I'll hope to see everybody there, and thank you again for joining us. Thank you.